Good evening, folks. We're so glad to have you with us as we have another one of our table talk discussions. As a matter of fact, we were just talking, and this is the 6th week that we've been doing this. The time has gone by fast, and as you know, we have been using this time to concentrate on the subject of priorities. It's because we believe this is a very important subject. As we look at our Bibles, we find that our God is a God of order, and we can see many examples of the priorities that even He Himself has put in place, not only for the people who first heard the Lord Jesus Christ, but His disciples especially as well to follow, and we consider ourselves to be His disciples certainly. So tonight, as we talk about priorities, we are going to go down a little bit of a different track in dealing with them, and I think you'll find it very practical. And I do want to say tonight that because it does pertain to communication, it applies to everyone. It applies not just to the category of married folk, as we are going to make special application, but this is for anybody. It's a wide spectrum because there are biblical principles that are going to be involved and are going to be set forth. So I hope you're going to stay with us through the end of what I think will be a very profitable discussion. And I think at the end, we're going to share with you a wrap up and give you a little bit of a preview of what we're going to be doing next week. I believe it was Joe who last week made the comment that communication is something we begin to work with in people's lives at the time of premarital counseling. I consider it to be one of the most important sessions when I'm working with a young couple, because we find this is where things need to be ironed out concerning priorities. Things need to be talked through, because we know that when priorities are out of place, there's a lot of friction, there's a lot of frustration, and things are just troublesome. And people oftentimes need help. And we are hoping that tonight will be a source of help for each and every one of you listening in. So tonight we have a couple here that's with us, and they're just itching to talk about these things. And I'm just itching to be the moderator and to ask the questions that I've put together for them. I think this will be an enjoyable time. And I hope for you too, it'll be an enjoyable time as you ride home tonight afterward. All right?
We drove separately.
Yes, there we go. So let's have a word of prayer and we'll begin. Father, thank you for making this time available. We're so grateful for our church family. We're so grateful for the opportunities that we have to learn and grow. And certainly as we talk about priorities and the importance that they have in our lives, in following you, in seeking to serve one another, not just in our church family, but in our homes. We pray, Father, that you'll give us a profitable time of discussion about these things, because we can all use help. None of us have arrived, and we know that these principles are eternal in nature. So I thank you for Joe and Sarah being here. I pray that you'll give them grace as we talk about these things. We pray, Father, that you'll work in our hearts so that the Lord Jesus Christ is honored and glorified. And it's in His name we pray. Amen. All right, so I put together a number of questions tonight for the purpose of this discussion, but one of my first questions is this. How long have the two of you been having communication problems? No, I just could not resist.
Well, how long have you been married?
But throw that out there for
How
you.
long have we been married?
Yeah, how long have you been married
It's
now?
either 22 or 23. Anniversary Saturday, right?
Yes, 22 years.
22 years.
So there's a little
For
room
22
for
years. We've been,
23 years. We
23
struggled in
years.
dating, too.
Okay, so we can see there's need for a little improvement in the communication area. Okay, but just before we even get into the question that I have here tonight, I'd like to think about this. What do you say to couples that have never gotten serious about priorities in the home? What would you say to them? It's something that's kind of flown under the radar, maybe even a lot of things that we've talked about over the course of the last 5 weeks. What would you say to them from your own personal experience? What counsel would you just give them in a nutshell for starters here tonight about the importance of these priorities?
So let me echo what you said earlier in your prayer there, and that is, we haven't arrived.
Right.
not only in communication, but even in biblical priorities. So, so speaking from, what we've learned, how would you counsel? What would you say? The first thing that came to my mind is it explains a lot. So whenever we're not on the same page with priorities, and we'll talk about that a bit. Quickly, hopefully you don't keep throwing non-agenda questions at us, but it is explanatory, right? So it explains why there are issues in the home, why there is conflict between husband and wife. So that's probably one of the things that I would say is if you haven't discussed and are not on the same page with priorities in the home, then it's explanatory why there is conflict in the home. So, and then encourage them to get on the same page, and then seek to help them get on the same page. And hopefully some of the things that we're able to discuss and that you question and give input to, that hopefully out of this comes some help, right? And that's been the aim, I think, out of all of these weeks,
Right.
is simply just to provide some help. I mean, this isn't, as we've discussed before, these sessions, it's not like a Sunday morning message, it's not a ABI teaching time, but it's really geared and designed to provide practical day-to-day help. And so hopefully that has come out and then comes out tonight. So
Okay, good.
anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, something you'd say to young couples about that
yeah.
may have not thought about priorities.
I would, depending where they are, that's what I would tell them they have to be. They have to be headed in the same direction. If they don't know that they're headed in the same direction, then obviously if they're married, then it's going to be different counseling than if they're dating or engaged, as far as making sure that you're on the same page and you're headed in the same direction, at least in the major big things. Even counsel I've given to my kids in that area of dating is, it doesn't necessarily matter where that person is in their walk with God within reason. What matters is where are they headed? What's their direction? Are they walking to get closer to God or not? And so I would say the same thing. You have to make sure you're headed in the same direction, at least in the major areas of what you guys have been talking about, of the priorities of the home.
Good. So in other words, and if I understand both of you right, a lot of the red flags that we're seeing, or should I say this, the conflicts, the disagreements, the tensions, are red flags that are indicative of an underlying issue, and most often it's priorities are not in place, understood, being communicated one between another.
Or in alignment.
Or in alignment.
And we know this from our own relationship, and
Sure.
maybe you as well in your relationship with Janet, but not only do we see it in our own lives, but in the lives of others, as we counsel and have relationships with people. So yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
Good. So let me ask you this, and be specific as much as you feel led to do this. I don't want to put you on the spot. So what sort of priorities have you put in your home?
Yeah.
If people out there were to say, we've been thinking about this, where do we start?
Right.
Maybe it would be helpful to them to see what one of their pastors' families has done.
Yeah. You want to go first, or?
It's fine.
So we have not talked about these questions, so I'm letting. We did not communicate. So as soon
That's
as
my first question.
As soon as you sent these over, I sent it to Sarah, but we actually don't know what the other person's going to say in regards to these questions. So,
fun.
So it'll be interesting.
We have an idea of what we'll see.
Yeah, we have a general idea, but we'll see if we're on the same page. So I think maybe if I can take like a 3,000-foot view to kind of put together and pull back on some of the things we've talked about. The priorities in our home, I think Sarah would agree, really, really big picture. I know you're wanting more specifics, and I think we'll get there actually throughout this time. But and that is relationship with God, relationship with one another in the home, and relationship with church. Those are priorities.
Okay.
And so you can cut me off anytime you want. But it really does have to do with Sarah and I were on the same page in those three primary prioritized relationships. Individually with God, with one another in the home, the family unit, and then the spiritual family of God. Those are priorities.
Okay.
Now, how those relationships look and play out, I think that'll come out, through our discussion tonight. But so simply put, it's boiled down to those three relationships, and that's helpful for me, just as I kind of assess in life and what we're called to do and how to manage and direct and lead our home, and it's quite frankly, it's reassuring and comforting just to boil it down to relationship with God, my family, and one another, the church.
Yeah, and I like that view that you set forth, the 3,000 plus foot view, so to speak. And, if we could say to our people to make sure that they are giving attention to those three areas. They're giving them serious thought, regular thought, and discussing how each of them feels about them.
I want to follow up on something, if you don't
Yes.
mind, but
Yeah, go ahead.
do you have anything you want to add to that or subtract or?
No, I mean, I agree. That's what our main priorities have been. And fortunately, we both grew up in homes that had similar, if not identical, priorities. So in some respects, we got a jump start, so to speak, than maybe some families did that, and some couples did that didn't grow up in families that had those priorities. And so I feel like in some respects, as I sit back, it's like, well, doesn't everybody know that? Doesn't everybody? But I know that that's not true. I know that I got a good start with my family. He got a good start with his family, with knowing what those priorities are. But definitely that has been our goal. And as he said, as we pull back, it does kind of drop away some of the conflict that comes when it's like, well, how does this apply and what is this? And then it's okay, we'll pull back. Does this, through that filter, does this work? Is that many times we've had the conversation, if we should do something, are we doing these things in the way that we should? And if not, should we be doing whatever this other thing is? Does this other thing fit in there?
So let me give you an example of that. Now, the listeners might be saying, well, we're supposed to say that because, we're in ministry home. I would like to think that if we weren't, we would still have the same response.
Can I, just to add on to that real quick too, is just
Yes,
that
I'll allow you to interrupt me on
Yeah.
live TV.
it was just a disclaimer that I had wanted to give at the beginning too, is that just because we might know, as we sit here, we might know a right answer or how we should do it, doesn't mean in the practical, when we're sitting at home and if something comes up and we disagree, that we are good at doing what we know is right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the bottom line. We're not good at always doing what we know is right. So just because we say it doesn't mean we're 100%.
We're not the perfect
Doing
husband
it.
and wife,
Sure.
just the perfect husband. I'm kidding.
Yeah. Now, here's what's interesting. Of those three, and I hadn't planned on saying this, but if you think about those three primary areas of priority, what do you find yourself, and I think I know the answer, but let's deal with it. Which of those three categories do you find you spend the most time on?
Why did I think you were going to go there? I feel like you're setting me up with my wife. So
It's different for the two of us.
it's different for the two of us, absolutely, and it does. And I chewed on this a bit last night or this morning. It really is in conjunction with our role, and so I can easily be a workaholic, and obviously she can be consumed with family stuff, and rightly so. That's her area that God has called her to, and this is my area too. Not that I don't help out with the kids at home, and not that she doesn't help out with ministry stuff. So, but if I'm going to err in an imbalance, it is prioritizing church family over the other two. Yeah. But what was coming to mind with this discussion is I really do think if individuals are prioritizing their relationship with God, then the priority of family and one another in the church will not be in conflict, but will actually be complementary.
Yes.
So I've been chewing on this for weeks regarding this. How do we balance? And is it the plate thing? You got 3 equal plates, but no, God, plate's got to be bigger, and so you got to keep spinning that all day long. And how does it work? But individually, we are to be fully committed in our covenant with God, and then out of that comes fully committedness in our covenant with our spouse and family.
Right.
and also one another.
Right.
And I don't think these two are in conflict. In fact, I think they're designed to be very complementary.
Yeah.
And so when someone says, and you've had this, someone said this to you too, I'm sure, and that is, well, how do I balance work and what's expected to me? I think we brought that up maybe in one of the sessions. And my answer, and this is just my personal opinion, and that is, I would hesitate encouraging someone to be fully committed and all in at work.
Right.
That is only kept for your covenantal relationships
That's right.
with God, your family, and one another in the church family.
Yeah.
And so the reason why I'm going there is because if a boss is leading a person, right, a husband or a wife, to be fully committed and all in, that's going to be in conflict with other relationships.
Right.
So then the question is, well, what does a person do?
Mm-hmm.
And feel free to chime in and correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't the response be well, maybe you need to look elsewhere,
Yes.
because we need to remember that work is purely a means to an end, just to put food on the table.
That's right.
Right? And those are not easy decisions, but the reason I'm going there is because work provides conflict in the home.
Yeah.
And if a wife, use a wife for example, feels her husband is fully committed and all in at work, there's going to be problems.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But she will never think, oh, I wish he wasn't fully committed or all in with the family.
Yeah.
So it breeds trust, right? Which reduces conflict in the home.
Good point. So as you look at these three, and like you say, it's kind of an evolving picture of how they relate to each other. So maybe if we looked at it as a three-stoned pyramid, with the top stone being our relationship to God, and underneath that, but side by side,
Right.
is this relationship,
That's right.
to the family as well as to the body of Christ,
Right.
how we relate to one another. But everything flows from that
That's right.
top stone.
That's right.
And being in right alignment
Yeah.
with that.
I think Lauren will have a graphic by the end of our session.
I imagine so. I just laid that out there. But I think it's to me that
that's
just
right.
it really helps, because if that stone is not in place in our lives, and we underneath that in our relationship to one another,
Yeah.
there's going to be tension there. There's always going to be a degree of tension, like you were just discussing. So good thoughts. So how did you come to a consensus about the priorities in your home? And I know you talked about the 3,000
Right.
level look, but you bring it down a little bit into priorities within your family, priorities when it comes to the relationship, Joe, of your work, your ministry, to the family, and coordinating all of this. How did you come to a consensus about those priorities? What did you find you had to talk through in that way?
Let me answer that first.
It's whatever. You just have something to say.
You're going to find out quickly that my wife does talk, by the way. That's a good thing.
But I don't interrupt.
She does not interrupt. There you go. Yeah. So to answer that, Pete, I think let me say this, that I'll speak for the husbands, right? That we need to own it, our responsibility, and we need to assess where things are at in our responsibilities, and then we need to discuss it. And so a wife, I think my wife wants to know that, no, I clearly see and own my responsibility as eternal leader, director, spiritual leader of eternal things in the home. Okay. So she wants to see that I own it and I'm fully committed, because that then results in trust.
Right.
And I think she wants to see that I actually assess what's going on. And that's I think a part that is missing, and that is, we do this in ministry and in work. You sit back and you assess things.
Right.
And so we assess where our kids are at, for example. Right, where are they at today in their walk with God? What struggles do they have? So I think even just stopping and sitting back and assessing, where's this relationship at with the spouse and the kids? Just assessing and then prayerfully chewing on how and where does God want me to lead in this kid, this kid, this kid, this kid, this kid, and this kid, actually. To count them all out. And I think that's a part that we often as dads, and I do often, and even leaders, assessing where relationships are. And then prayerfully ask, how does God want me to guide and direct them? Okay?
Okay.
I'm going to get to your question. and so then,
I haven't forgotten it.
okay, good.
I was going to ask you to repeat it because I forgot it too.
Own
I
it.
can do that in a minute.
So these three came to mind this morning, so I needed to share them, and this is a good place. So own it, assess it, and then discuss it.
Okay.
And it's that third piece that I think
That's the one I was,
most guys don't want to do.
right,
I mean, I don't.
right.
I mean, I'm fine with owning it. I'm fine with assessing it. I mean, I enjoy sitting back and assessing where's things at, because then that allows me to problem solve. And I love problem solving. Even if it's not my problem, I'll solve, that.
Sure,
I'll jump
solve
in.
my problems.
I did that with the intro, didn't I? And so most guys like that, but the part that they don't like, right? It's not about the nail illustration video for those of you that have seen that. Put a nail in my eye. The last thing I want to do is discuss it.
Okay, now, that's a big point, because do you feel an obligation, being the head of your home, as the one who should initiate that discussion? That doesn't mean that you're all the time waiting for Sarah to do this
Sure.
and say, Joe,
Yeah.
I've got something to say over here. But do you feel an obligation, a readiness to, okay, I need to go to Sarah, we need to sit down and have a discussion about this?
So I do feel an obligation, and I think that would be resultant if I'm owning it, assessing it, and then that should naturally lead to discussing it.
Okay.
But because I can be passive in my flesh, or really primarily I want to avoid that hard discussion, I'll actually not bring it up, and then she oftentimes will bring stuff up,
Right.
and she can speak to that. And I don't have a problem with that personally.
Right.
I think the husbands are to lead in setting the priorities, but I don't have a problem if the wife initiates an idea.
Yeah.
So you want to speak to that?
Yeah, and I want Sarah to speak to that. Just hold 1 second. But let me just say this, being a guy here too, and having a home, I find the same is true in my own life as well. Okay, I've got to go out on a limb, so to speak. I need to trust God. I need to open up. I need to be honest, transparent, forthright.
Yeah.
And I do this out of love, first for God, to obey His word, but out of love for my wife, because she wants to hear from me. She wants to know what I'm thinking and where we ought to be going as well.
Yeah, and we'll give you a specific. I mean, I've got a couple. I'm sure she has a couple. You
Okay.
wanna
Yeah.
respond
So
to any of that?
so Sarah, the question is again, how do you come to a consensus on these priorities? What have you found to be helpful, maybe challenging, in getting to that place where, okay, Joe, we're in agreement on this?
I think kind of what you were saying, coming down from the 3,000 feet to a little bit closer, I think for us over the years that's evolved. So how do those main priorities start working into the home? It evolved because we've changed, our family has changed. It's also evolved because, it's one thing to read the book on what should happen and then actually be in that situation. And so some of our priorities evolve on the fly. Okay, so what is going on here? What's this? What really is our priority here?
Sure.
Can you give an example of
The
that? Whisper it in my ear first.
I'm thinking, the difficulties with that, which is what you just asked, is the difficulties are just that because of life, you don't always have, sometimes more than we think we do, but you don't always have the time to sit down for 3 hours and discuss it. You may not even have the time to, okay, well, I'm going to pull back. I'm going to pray about this. I'm going to, sometimes it is a discussion that needs to happen right now. And so for me, I think that's the difficulty in sometimes with the priorities. As far as what did you ask, the specifics? Probably a lot of it revolves around kids, but all the time we have stuff come up. A kid wants to do something, an opportunity comes up, and we have to discuss how does that fit? Does it fit?
Right.
Well,
So-
were you pausing to
Well,
want me to jump
you
in? Or?
looked like you were ready
I was
to
about ready to
jump
jump in,
in.
but go
So
ahead. We have communication problems, folks. Well, I'd use the one like, kid's job. So speaking of priorities,
Right.
the kids know that they cannot work Wednesday. They can't work Sundays or they can't work Wednesdays, right?
Yep.
That's the general rule, okay? Especially not Sundays. And we have established with them that we prefer them not work Wednesdays. Is that correct? Yeah. But is it,
even though our one daughter's working tonight.
even though, so that's where I was going to bring. So what happens when one has just got a job there
Yeah.
Right, and so there are exceptions, and so we do have to talk about these, but the norm is, that's not, back to your pyramid rock
Yeah,
idol thing that you were talking about there, it's not gonna conflict, so her job is important, right?
right.
It's important to her, it's important to us, because she needs to, start saving money for college.
Yep.
But it's not gonna conflict with relationships. That's the priority.
Okay,
Okay, now some would differ and they've got good reasons, but for us, that's just the priority that we set, that we're on the same page with, and she needs to see, I just narrowed it. I was gonna say 3, but I narrowed it to 2. She needs to see that we're on the same page,
right.
right, with that decision.
Okay, this is big, okay, what you just said. Do you feel that you have to be in complete agreement about such a priority like that? So, Sarah, you feel you don't need to be?
And that's where we
No.
disagree.
No, I would say that's nice. That's a huge blessing from the Lord when you can both as a couple, yes, you need to agree on those 3.
Yeah,
For sure.
on the idol.
But how does that work underneath when it comes to the practical? How does that play out when it comes to, okay, teaching our kids that God is first, family relationships, our church family are huge deals. Teaching them that those really are a big deal and really a cornerstone in their life now and continuing. But how does that practically work out? So like I grew up in a home where you never missed if the doors were open. There was no question. I was at every teen activity. I was at everything that was there. I was to be at. And I wasn't a kid who bucked up against that, so it wasn't a bad experience. But practically speaking, is that always the case? Are there reasons? And so we have to play that on a case-by-case basis with our kids. But as far as us always agreeing, I don't think we have to. It's nice when we do. I think we do, and we need to work on hopefully agreeing. But there's plenty of times where, practically speaking, I have said to my kids, they'll say, "Can I do this?" "No." "Why not?" "Because your dad said so." And so I don't necessarily understand his reasons, but he feels strongly about it, and so this is what we're doing.
It is a huge blessing when we're on the same page,
Yes.
because then we avoid long conversations. But it is something, so it's not like what I say goes. And so this is kind of, I think, what some
Because
of
you
your
do the
questions.
same things too. There's things around the house where he says, "We're doing this because."
Well,
your
that's
mom would
typically
like
go
us
talk to
do
your
this."
mother.
Right,
But, yeah.
But we're, I guess what I'm saying is, if it's, and there are levels here, so if they're bigger deals, then we're talking, we're making sure we're on the same page before we talk to the kids.
good.
And if they're smaller things, and quite frankly, I have no problem if it makes it easier for her. Not that that's how she is going to be motivated in her responses to the kids.
Right.
But if it's easier for her to say, "Go talk to me," then it's like, because we've talked about it, it's like, tell them I said so.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's a critical issue, and I have counseled folks along those same lines. It's so important for the husband and wife to have an agreement. They may not see eye to eye on everything, but to have an agreement before they go to the children. Because we know it's human nature, and our children have those, that they're going to look for the the chink in the armor, so to speak, the weakest link, and exploit that. So I think that's a very good thing. Now, let me just probe a little bit further, because I think it's practical. It's not because I'm trying to throw a knuckleball here or anything like that at you. But how do you talk through these priorities and make these decisions, whether it's in your personal relationship, what you're going to do, what you're going to follow, or for your children in this sense? Do you find yourself defaulting to one or the other if the other has a real strong opinion? And how do you navigate that? Let's suppose, Joe, that you've done all the processing ahead of time here. You identified, assessed, and all of this, and you get down to communicating. But you find out that Sarah feels very strongly
All right.
about that. How do we navigate those waters? Because I really do believe that a lot of couples, this is where they find they're paddling in the rapids.
So, so in that third level, if you will, of discussing it, I discuss it with Sarah because I know, right, that she's my helper, not that I have a plan and this is what we're going to do, and my discussion is, now go do it. That's not it.
Yeah.
The discussion is, I'm going to discuss it with Sarah because I do value, right?
Okay.
I don't say that
I believe that.
often, but I do. That's a whole other conversation. That I discuss it with Sarah because I do value her intelligent, creative help in helping me lead the family. Let me clarify, it's not like she's assistant leader, it's that God has given the man a wife
helpmate.
to help
Yep.
in the direction of setting a family that's geared and directed towards the things of the Lord. So my point there is, it would be foolish of me not to discuss it with her, to get her creative thoughts, her intelligent thoughts, to see where she's at. Is she in agreement? If she's not in agreement, let's talk about it, right? And so very rarely, to be honest with you, there really are not many major decisions at all that we're not on the same page.
Good.
And this is why premarital counseling is huge.
I totally agree.
I mean, it's like you need to make sure you're on the same page,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like I know that, so when it comes to car buying, house buying, we're on the same, I mean, I don't even need to be there. I wasn't there.
I was going to say, you're with,
that's
with me
right.
down in Guyana in 2011.
But we are one-minded in that we both are like relatively cheap, right? Relatively quick in the sense of it's not going to take a whole lot of time, energy, and money and effort to look into it and buy it. Is it functional? Is it going to serve our needs, right? Go with it. So the big decisions we don't wrestle over,
Good.
right?
Yeah.
I think the decisions where, so this is where it peels it back and gets specific and practical, and Sarah can jump in here, is really when it has to, yeah, there you go. Yeah. Is really when it has to do with the day in and little stuff. And I think that's pretty normal with families. Probably it's the little stuff like kids. So let me just throw one out there, okay? You probably didn't know I was going to throw this one out here. We tend to disagree most, right, on my treatment of my daughters. And they're her daughters too.
Interesting.
I would say most, but it is an ongoing.
I'm all ears.
But there are others. You're all ears.
I'm all ears.
Can I explain it? I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
No, yours, go.
No, well, he's just you. It's
Well, that's
better-
the one that we talk
it's
about
better if
typically.
you self-admit than if I accuse you. So
Principle 101.
Let's see. We'll be counseling after this
That's
session
right, that's
before
right,
you
that's right, yeah.
record.
Well, we
So,
figured we'd have our very first fight on
Yeah.
YouTube Live. So yeah, I mean, as a guy, I will be overly protective and cautious with my daughters.
and
So-
more easy on.
And yeah, maybe a little bit more easier on the girls. But this is why
Everybody's
it's
watching has seen you with your girls.
this
with
is
Carly,
why
so.
this is why it's important for husbands to listen to their wives when it comes to rearing daughters.
Mhm.
But it's also important for wives to listen to their husbands in the rearing of sons.
Good point.
And so she helps me disciple my daughters. And it really is parallel to the role of women in the church too. So I want to insert bigger picture, not only the family unit, but the spiritual unit of God, right?
Yeah.
And that is, we are aided in the discipleship of the women at Grace through the help of the women at Grace. And so my wife helps me disciple my daughters by talking to me about how I disciple my daughters, how I treat them, how I talk with them, right? And so I do tend to be easier on them, overprotective. Like specifically, this is an issue that we talked about a couple months ago, where one of our daughters would be working. Okay, so you may take it from there.
Thank you. No, we had the discussion. He was a lot more narrowed down to you can work at Chick-fil-A and that's all.
Don't
Pretty
give
much.
specifics. Don't give
Pretty much,
specifics.
that was it. And so we just talked through, I mean, that's somewhat female oriented, but somewhat kind of how the two of us have different backgrounds. But
Don't mention my parents on live TV.
so he tends to be, yes, definitely more like, and I get that. I'm not concerned for my kids and their well-being. But at some point I know I'm going to have to, I mean, our oldest daughter is 18.
Yeah.
We can't keep protecting her. She has to learn how to, I mean, we can protect her, you know what I mean? But you're out. But we can't, she has to learn how to do these things on her own. She has to go out. And so, but that doesn't mean we won't disagree on
Right.
how does that practically work? What do we let them do? And all the time, as I'm sure as most husband and wives, we're surprised at each other. Like he'll be like, I can't believe you're fine with that. Or the kids will come and say, we're doing this. Dad said we could. And I'm like, what? Like, that was okay with you? But in the end, I believe God helps us to be the balance that those kids need.
But you're even wanting to know even more specifically how we talk that out. And one of the things is,
Yeah, like for instance, how important is asking
When we
questions?
disagree.
Yeah, how is important is asking questions and listening to one another? How
I'm
important?
sorry, what'd you say? Yeah.
So things like that, yeah.
Well, you had asked too about the, in disagreements, what do we do when we disagree, when we aren't on the same page? And I think for us, it kind of depends on the gravity of the situation. How big is this decision? In some of the minor everyday things, will he defer to me if it's, my area? Like, this is what I want the kids to do with their dishes when they're done. He might think it's dumb, but he'll think
Yeah.
this is Sarah's domain. This is what she wants, so he'll defer.
She's chosen that, by
It's
the way. For the record.
I always wanted to be a stay-at-home wife and mom. Nobody forced me. Anyway, but then there's bigger things, and there's been plenty of bigger things where I can say, I know it rubs, hopefully not a lot of our ladies the wrong way, but it will rub our society in general the wrong way, and that is, it's a blessing to me that when these big things come up and we aren't in agreement, there's been at least a handful of things that we weren't in agreement, but I had the blessing of saying, ultimately, this decision is not mine. It's not, yes, I've said my piece, but the weight of that responsibility of that decision, if Joe feels strongly differently than me, is not one that I have to take, because I can say, okay, he might be wrong, but you know what? If I'm following him like God tells me, I can be 100% sure that I'm obeying God, and my relationship with God is where it needs to be. And that is not necessarily easy, but it is a huge comfort and a huge relief from that. And we've had,
What were some of those issues you're talking about?
well, early on, the decision to homeschool our oldest, we both looked at him and his unique gifts and talents, and I hope he's watching this. And I looked at everything that was going on there and said, he needs to go to school. He looked at everything that was going on.
And I said, he needs out.
Oh, no, he was 5. But we looked at the same things, but came to a different conclusion. His conclusion was, because of this whole package, you need to homeschool him. That wasn't what I wanted to do. It wasn't what I thought I was ever going to do. But it was what he felt strongly about, and so that's what we did. I think the other time that comes to mind is November of 2016.
Wow, she has the date, and I have no idea what she's talking about.
Seriously, that's sad. It's our son's birthday.
Oh.
We got a phone call asking if we would take our youngest, Toby.
I remember now.
At the time, and we had been discussing it for months, never able to come to you. I think every married couple has had that, those issues where you feel like you talk it to death and it never settles out into, this is a plan, this is what we're gonna do. So we just always put it off. We'll wait till we get the phone call. If we get the phone call, we didn't know if we would. And we did, and we thought we'd have time after the phone call, and we didn't have time after the phone call. We got called the next day. We need to know now. And I could not come to peace with it. If it was me on my own, we've discussed this many times afterward. If it was me on my own, I probably would have said yes right away, based on emotions. He felt strongly that we did not have a clear leading of God. But because he felt that way, I could know with certainty that God was speaking to me through my husband.
Good point.
That there was no clear leading, because I didn't have a clear leading anyway. I was both ways. I was like, I
And
don't know,
because we
what should
weren't on
do?
the same page, we knew it wasn't God's
Right,
leading
and
at
so
the
when
time.
he said God is not leading us clearly that way, then it was kind of not easy. It was the hardest thing, one of the hardest things I've ever done. I could, but then say I can't, because how dare I think I can take this on if God is not in this? How dare I be that arrogant to say I can do this?
Right.
And it was an amazing time. I mean, God did that. I was able to see him work in that week between when we said no and thought it wasn't going to happen and had no word. And I remember him coming to me and saying to me, basically, are you going to be okay? And I could say with complete faith, not just the right words, but knew in my heart, yes, either God's going to change things so this little boy does come to our family, or he's going to heal my broken heart, because that's what God does. And this is, I knew I had done the right thing, even though it didn't feel good. And then God decided to change things up, and he was our son now, and is our son now. But those are times where God, through our marriage, has built my faith more and more to be able to submit.
Yeah.
I will say, it sounds weird. It's easier for me a lot of times in the big things, the big dramatic things, to submit than it is in the day-to-day, just little things at the house. Like, I don't want the boys leaving their socks, and I can get upset about the boys leaving their socks or whatever. And he could be like, it's not that big of a deal.
The socks, that's a big deal.
Or it could be opposite. Sometimes he's like, you really need to do this. And I'm like, it's not that big of a deal. So the little practical things can be hard. And I will admit it can be very hard as a wife to enforce, I guess we're mainly talking about kids here, but to enforce things that you don't agree with. And so that's why, like you're saying, that's why you do discuss and try to get on the same page.
You look like you're going to follow up some.
Yeah.
No, that's good stuff. I just want to say, I am so glad you brought that up, Sarah. I think it's very valuable, because here's what I'm thinking right now. Yes, we're talking about communication, but priorities are coming through. And that priority, one, in, head of the home, a loving husband, and a wife who knows the priority at all times of being submissive, first to God, and in being submissive to God, to be submissive to her husband. And the burden that takes off. How important that is, to know. I'm thinking of 1 Peter, chapter 3, that you are Sarah's daughters if you are not afraid. And I've shared this with couples, especially premarital couples, the importance of not trying to control every situation so as to alleviate your fears, but to trust and to submit and to know that God has appointed this man in your life to bear those things.
But even Pete, following up with that, it's not that she, so this is why it's important to get on the same page. I wouldn't lead her, and I wouldn't push anything forward through, especially not in big areas, if she's not on the same page.
I totally agree, yeah.
This was an area that was a priority for both of us.
Right.
In fact, when God first laid adoption on our hearts, she was the one that originated the idea. So God actually led us through her and her idea first.
Correct. And I wasn't thinking so much of just the adoption, but all the things she was
no,
saying
that's right,
before
yeah.
about,
That's
of the wonderful blessing that a wife has in all aspects of submission. It's a giving over to God through her husband.
And the only reason I was bringing that out, Pete, was in case there are some men listening who then are going to use that as an occasion to ramrod their agenda through. We're going to have a discussion.
Right.
And I'm going to hear from my creative, intelligent wife who has assessed our home too, and I'm going to discuss it with her. And then, are we on the same page? Okay, let's go forward. And the bigger ones are easier. The smaller ones, they become more difficult.
That's right. Okay, very, very good point. So let me ask you this. You're talking about children and 7 kids, a busy household. And we have families in our church that have sizable households too, but honestly, us just having 3, my wife worked hard and had a very busy household too. So the question is, when things become so busy and ministry is busy, how do you prioritize? What does it look like for you guys to talk to each other, to spend time in communication?
So this is the one we're wanting to avoid.
Our son, our
This is the most we talk to each
oldest
other.
just asked us yesterday, when's the last time you guys had a date night? We were like, oh.
Because honestly, in our hectic society today, and with so much going on in kids' lives in general, it seems that there's where we're trying to keep these plates spinning. And a good day is when we're communicating with our kids and helping them to get the priorities that we have in our home. But then we're looking at each other, okay, it's time to go to bed. The day's over. So how do you prioritize in that area?
So there are, and Jeff kind of alluded to this is what he and Laura has done, and we have done this too. Unfortunately, it ends up being those once a year times when it's your anniversary dinner out, and then it's like, hey, let's talk shop, and you think you're not going to do that, but you end up doing that. And maybe that's just us, and maybe it's because I come with an agenda for our date night. I don't know. But she's smirking because she knows it's true. But to answer your question, so we do utilize those times, big picture, calendar discussion, and then, quite frankly, then it's the rat race is on, and we spend a lot of time communicating, keeping each other up to speed via email, texts, and a big 3x4 calendar in our kitchen. Every kid's got their color-coded pen, and everything goes right there, and we utilize iCloud calendar syncing, and we've just got to be on the same page like that, or it's going to be a wreck.
Yeah.
We'll lose somebody.
We'll lose somebody.
I think you were asking though.
Was that what you were asking?
How do we prioritize our relationship?
I'm thinking of more your relationship, but it does. It's in light of the fact that you have a busy household. So yeah, you're
I will
not
say
totally off.
That was not in the questions, Pete.
It definitely is something that, I mean, if we're being quite honest, we do struggle with because we're tired, we're doing.
Someone's being honest.
I am being honest. So we do struggle with it. We go back and forth. So I don't fall into the camp of you have to have a weekly date night or your marriage is going to die. I don't think that's true. I think if you can do that, that's amazing and that's wonderful, and do that. But I think at times, if you feel like that's the Bible, and so if you're not doing that, your marriage is going to die.
Right.
We're going to be in trouble. Our marriage is dead for 10 years now. But anyway,
Oh, that's so touching.
we do need to
You save much money.
prioritize it. And I think when we're not is when we do end up having conflict. And it doesn't have to be, sometimes it's just us taking the time, 10 minutes in the kitchen to catch up and talk about what was your day.
Yeah.
So our own tendencies are to be independent. So when stuff's going on, our tendencies are to be our independent units, doing our independent things, surviving and getting done.
Sure.
And so it might take something, or it might take, a conflict or something, or me bringing it up that it's been a while, and like you said, I need to know what's going on with you. So sometimes it really has to be a conscious, okay, I'm going to go tell him about my day because we need to talk more than just, and you need to come tell me about what your day was or what happened or something.
And that's
just the everyday communicating what happened, not like the list of, okay, I'm going to tell you now I did this,
Right.
this,
Right.
but just him talking to me about this was funny today or this was frustrating today.
Or can you believe what Pete said? I mean,
Plenty to talk about there.
let me touch on that because that's important. And so just kind of opening up and bearing our souls. And I don't think we're alone here. Again, men typically like to problem solve. They spin their plates, and then the ladies are spinning their plates. But what I need to often be reminded of is that my wife doesn't want to just hear my problem-solving list or what the problems are and how I can solve them. She just wants to have a conversation, and that's not what I do. I mean, conversation, it's like, why would I want to sit here and open up my soul and my heart and share all my feelings? It's like, shoot me now.
You don't have any feelings.
There you go. That's what we've talked about. So, but it would be, I mean, especially with the busy life that we have, it's like business, where guys, I'm speaking to myself, but to all the guys, it's like really often most ladies want to just have a discussion. Let's just talk. How are you doing? How was the day? And they, through that, they feel a sense from you that you're all in, that you're committed in this covenantal relationship, not just a problem solver. And so that's probably not a surprise to you, Pete, that's something I'd say. I mean,
No.
but I don't think I'm unusual in that. I think there's a lot of guys out there that are similar.
Yeah, I would agree. So, speaking of the kids again here, if you don't mind.
We do. We're tired of it.
You're tired. How do you go about sharing and helping young people with priorities? Is it something that, you make a list, you got the board, you slap it on the board, here's the priorities, for your lives, for your day. What are practical ways that parents can help children understand mom and dad's priorities, God's priorities? What are some practical ways to do that? I realize we have a good church to help, especially with God ordained priorities and things, not that you would shift that responsibility to the church. But, how do you go about in a practical way sharing priorities and helping young people set priorities in the home?
Well, one, I'll give a few and then you can jump in if you want. One, we kind of touched on a bit, and that is just teaching them that worshiping God with the community of believers is important and takes precedence over work. Not that you can't do both, and that's the aim. Work and, right? So even little things like that go a long way, teaching them how to tithe, and
do you try to make sure that you're bringing in the why?
we try to. Sarah does a much better job with that than I do. One of the reasons is
Too much, my kids would say. I try.
yeah, we
I'll tell you
both.
the why for a good long while.
But you realize the importance of it.
Yeah, our kids
Yeah.
would rather get the discipline than have the conversation. Seriously, they would. And so we do try to do the why. She does much better job at that than I do, mainly because she's around them more and she's more involved in their lives with those day-to-day kind of things. And so, why do we tithe? You go to work. Why do you go to work? Okay, you tithe, you give to others, you save some for yourself, right? You save,
Right.
you save for a future, right? Kind of do the $5 principle thing there, and you teach them in that through that. That is. There was another. When God brought adoption into our house, we had a sit-down conversation with our kids. That was a teaching moment. In fact, we've discussed this before, that there's probably nothing, I think that's fair to say, there's probably nothing that God has brought into our lives that has grown our faith as much as this occasion of adoption. Okay, now that's just for us. That's not for everyone.
Right.
Okay? But for us, that's what he used, and I can clearly remember the time where we brought all the kids downstairs, and we said, this is the step we're feeling God is leading us, and we had a conversation with them, and we even went so far as saying that this will affect Christmas, right? So this will affect, you don't get 2 gifts, you get a half a gift, kind of a deal.
Yeah.
Right?
And you
Right.
share it with your sister.
And
be
then
a
you have to
sacrifice.
share it. That's right.
Right. Okay.
What else to add to
I
that?
was just gonna say, Ed, that it's different at different ages,
Yep.
as with a lot of parenting. So for the younger ones, obviously the young ones don't have jobs, so we're not teaching them tithing. But as far as priorities of we go to church, so Carly, we go to church and we do this because it pleases God, and you're doing it because I told you to. So this is, yes, we're teaching her, but at some point when they're young, you're having the why, and she's going like she doesn't care.
Correct.
It doesn't mean we don't keep saying it. And as they get older, it becomes less enforcing.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of teaching, but we're not, it's more, this is what you should do. This is what you should do with your time, but it becomes more stepping back and letting them make the choice based on their age, based on their maturity, make the choice to do it or not. We're not making some of our older kids, our daughter who's 18, we're not saying, okay, no, what are you putting in the bank and what are you putting in,
Right. Right.
and leaving a lot more of the decisions. There's still responsibilities because she's in her home, but whereas as they get younger, there's more of, no, you need to do this.
Yeah.
This is why, but you're doing it whether you want to or not, because it's the right thing to do. But as they're older and as they're moving out, it's, this is what I think you should do. This is what I think God wants you to do.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting to see children pick up on those and incorporate those priorities in their lives? And in all honesty, even to develop, because of learning the importance of having priorities, of setting priorities for themselves, different ones that they bring into their lives. I mean, you'll see that down the road as we have with our children, coming to marriage age and on. They have a set of priorities that the main 3 are in place, but it's exciting to see them stepping up and realizing that importance too.
Well, that's encouraging to hear, because we're still not there.
Yes.
Well, no, and that plays into parenting them as well. There's times where, the thing that came to my mind was certain modesty standards that we set, or maybe not even modesty, but what they wear to a Sunday service.
Yeah,
But we've always been very clear with them. You're doing that. This is the standard we set. Once you're out of the house, you wear. I've told my girls. So a standard we set. There's nothing wrong with wearing jeans to church.
Yeah.
That was just kind of a standard we set for making it separate, making it a special occasion by we wear something a step up. That was just our own personal. But we've been very clear with them, and I've told them, like, when you're 18 and you decide you want to wear jeans to church, our daughter did. I'm like. And I didn't even notice it, to be honest. She told me when she got home. But I was like, I said, I will not even care. I won't care because it's not a moral issue. It's not a obey God or not issue. This is just what we're setting
right.
in our home. This is how we're trying to make it a priority, how we're trying to make it special. So there are things that, we have also wanted to make sure that we're clear that, this is the standard we're setting, but this is not God's standard. And so.
Good.
Can I jump in with something? I
Yeah.
know we're running out of time.
Yes, and I was just going to think about that
Yeah,
here.
you know me, I'm keeping track of time here, but I want to get this in real quick about very, very specific, practical, because this is one of the things that came to mind. So
Yeah.
specifically, how does a husband and wife communicate with an issue?
Right.
Okay. What works for us, and everyone's got their own way, but just to throw this out there, if this is helpful, what works for us is because sit-down conversations don't often happen as much as they should, she or I will communicate via email, text, or whatever, but we'll schedule a time to sit down and talk about it, okay?
Yeah.
Typically this, hey, I'm going to bring this up, Johnny on the spot, doesn't go well with a full day.
Yeah.
And so a lot of conflict in the home begins because it was entered into foolishly. And so for us, we've just learned that it's like, I'm going to give him or her a heads up that
Yeah.
this is on my mind and I want to talk about this. And we even go so far as saying, this Thursday, can we talk about it?
Carve out the time.
That we carve at the time. And that way,
Yep.
and she'll even like say, this is what I want to talk about it. This is what I want to talk about. And so she's planting a seed in my mind that, okay. And really what that does is that starts preparing my mind and heart for that subject.
Yeah.
And so that goes a long way when it comes to reducing conflict.
That's a good point too. Good
And
point.
bathing it in prayer.
And bathing it in
is-
prayer.
is
That's right.
huge.
And then discussing it,
And
taking
not,
time.
so I'm sure for everybody, but the advice I would give to anybody in communicating, but particularly wives and marriages, is take a step back. If you're upset and it doesn't absolutely have to be right now that it gets discussed, because sometimes there are other emergency, whatever has to be right now. If it does not have to be right now, don't do it right now. You need the time to, and I don't know if this helps other people. I've given this advice even to my kids, is for me, sometimes it helps too, because you find yourself, I'm upset about this and this, and this and this and this, and it gets this big. So what helps me at times is to, on my phone or on a paper, write a note. Here's the list. And then pray about it, and then start weeding out, okay, what really is the issue? What really is the thing that we need to talk about? It really wasn't all these other things. And along with what he said, my only disclaimer with the texting and all of that is I would say just be careful that you don't default to only that.
Yeah.
Because no, but honestly, I've found times where we get particularly busy and we get lax and we just keep texting, that it's almost like then conversation becomes awkward.
Yeah.
Because all of our chatter, all of our small talk has gone on a phone, and it's almost like it's two separate people that you're communicating. I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe that's just a woman's mind, but I would just say be careful that it doesn't become your only form of communication,
Okay, good
just
point.
virtual.
Can I say a concluding statement that kind of summarizes
Yeah.
what was on my mind with this subject?
Yeah.
Okay. So true progressive sanctification takes place through community, which takes place primarily through communication. And I had never thought about it that way before until this afternoon,
Yeah.
whether it be church or the physical family, right? And that is true progressive sanctification takes place in community of the physical family and community of the spiritual family of God, which happens through communication. So I'm wondering if you can even have true, genuine community sanctification outside of any kind of communication. It's like, it's part and parcel.
Yep.
It like has to be with that.
Yes.
And so, that was on my mind today, so.
Well, and God is, you know, as he used to say, Ronald Reagan was a great communicator. It's always been God. God is a God of communication, and he has ordained that we learn how to communicate and incorporate that in our relationships. It's necessary for
right, yeah.
sanctification.
Yeah.
So good. So what I'd like to do, I did have another question, like, is there ever a time to, you know, review priorities, and how do you go about that, or are they, you know, pretty much set in place? But that's maybe a subject for another time. So here's what I thought we would do tonight is we would conclude this series by giving you the opportunity to ask yourself a question, and then to ask your spouse a question, and perhaps even to ask your church family a question. So what might be a question you would ask yourself? How about this? What is one area of my life where God is leading me to prioritize more intentionally? Perhaps you can identify that with some thought, and maybe to pray about that. Lord, help me to see an area where I could give some intention to a priority that's needful. How about asking your spouse a question like this? What is one specific priority change that we need to discuss and implement in the home? And maybe it's an assumed priority or a fixed priority that's been there for a long time. Does that mean it's according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which will never alter? Is there maybe a time for adjustment that you both, in growing in grace, have felt led of God to give some attention to? How about this one? Ask your church family, what are blind spots? And I'm talking about not standing up at Grace Bible Church and we're all back together and asking them, but asking individuals that perhaps you can open up more freely with, what are blind spots in my priorities that may be obstacles to a life lived in community to the glory of God? So helping one another work through areas in our own priorities that perhaps need some adjustment. So I trust this is helpful to each and every one of you and that you've enjoyed these weeks. Now, what we're planning on doing next week, Joe, feel free to jump in here. We are getting very close to opening after the length of time that we have not been together corporately. And I do want to say that next week, the elders will be giving attention to that. We want you to tune in for that, and hopefully we can kind of help pave a smooth way for when these doors were going to be open again. So thank you for the time tonight. I want to thank Joe and Sarah for their time. It's been good. I've enjoyed it. I think it's been really profitable, and thank you for your candidness in all of this. So how about a closing word of prayer? Father, bless us tonight as we digest the things that we have heard, that we think them over in light of your word, in light of your will and plan for our lives, your love for us, and the importance of sanctification and communication as part of that. We pray, Father, that these things will be useful, that we will grow in them, and that you'll give us the grace to have lives that are ordered under your direction. And we will thank you for that in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, folks.